i materiali sono diversi da quello che erano 50-100 anni fa, anche più.
I'm Ginta Biko, and this is Giorgetti Voices, the podcast which brings you conversations about design. Through a journey exploring ideas, visions, and stories, we recount design in all its forms. Today, we'll be talking about architecture that seems to have landed from another planet. Large reinforced concrete domes, 20 or 30 meters in diameter, scattered across the countryside of Emilia, the rocks of Sardinia, the slopes of Mount Etna, the Australian forests, and the deserts of Texas. Homes, schools, gyms, libraries, observatories. Sometimes experiments, sometimes still-lived spaces, all sharing the same radical vision. These are the Binishells. Joining us today is Dante Bini, architect, inventor, entrepreneur, and pioneer who has spent a lifetime thinking and building out of the box. Born in 1932 in Castelfranco Emilia, Bini developed a revolutionary construction system in the 1960s. Concrete cast flat on the ground, then lifted into its final form using only the pressure of air. No scaffolding, no waste, a 50-ton dome rising from the earth in 60 minutes. Dante Bini doesn't just design spaces, he shapes matter with a breath of air. And like Brunelleschi before him, he invents the tools to do it. His patented system have produced more than 1,600 domes across 23 countries. Among the most iconic, the house built in 1970 for Michelangelo Antonioni and Monica Vitti on the Sardinian coast. A futuristic residence overlooking the sea, suspended between experiment and poetry. But his curiosity never stopped there. Over 100 patents, megastructures for Tokyo, emergency housing, and a lunar habitat designed for a Japanese space agency. Because for Dante Bini, ideas are seeds that travel through the air. The same air he has spent a lifetime learning to shape matter with. At 94, his enthusiasm for the future shows no sign of slowing down. Dante, welcome to a new episode of Giorgetti Voices. Mr. Bini, let's talk about the method that led you to develop the Bini shell system, the construction technique you conceived in the 1960s. It makes it possible to build reinforced concrete domes quickly and at a low cost. It all began as an intuition. Then you proceeded empirically, testing and retesting, building prototype after prototype in a field near San Cesario sul Panaro outside Modena. That testing ground became known as the Mushroom Field. Why?
Il titolo Mushroom Field fu coniato.
The name Mushroom Field was coined by one of the greatest professors of engineering and architecture at Columbia University, Mario Giorgio Salvadori. He did not believe I was building domes blown up with air in 60 minutes, so he came to Italy to see my experiments with his own eyes. And when he did, he looked around and said, "This is the Mushroom Field." He then wrote an article in the New York Times. He called it exactly that. That is the story behind the name. A very amusing story, I have to say.
Mr. Bini, can you tell us about the intuition that led you to patent this new construction system, born from the desire to give matter a new form? And what was the goal of the experimentation?
I had always thought, even back when I was studying architecture in Florence, that we were building with systems 2,000 years old. So it seemed logical and advantageous to recognize that we were living in our own time, with products and materials that had never existed before, including pneumatic forms. And from the pneumatic form came something very strange. Something I can confess to you is the absolute truth. I was playing tennis under an inflatable dome here in Bologna at the Giardini Margherita with a friend of mine, Filippo Sassoli de Bianchi. At the end of a match that had lasted 2 hours, we tried to leave, but we couldn't open the second door of the pneumatic structure. We pushed, and then we realized. During our match, about 80 centimeters of snow had fallen on a dome large enough to contain 2 tennis courts. And yet, I hadn't felt any increase in pressure inside. That was the moment. With a minimal amount of compressed air, I would be able to lift all the domes I had designed for my thesis. I already knew their weight.
Con una minima entità, un particolare di aria compressa, sarei riuscito a sollevare tutte le cupole che io avevo progettato per la mia tesi di laurea e di cui sapevo esattamente il carico, il peso.
Think about it. Today, to build a dome the size of the Pantheon, I lift 380 tons of concrete and steel with the same pressure you use to smoke a cigarette,
E voi fumate una sigaretta.
which is ridiculous. Technically speaking, it is 2/100ths of an atmosphere. This astonished me so deeply, and it forced me to consider entirely new ways of building.
Sistemi di costruzione che si attaccassero ai momenti attuali.
So, Mr. Bini, faster to build and, above all, cheaper?
Vi invito a guardare sull'internet.
I invite you to consider what can be achieved using compressed air in place of the timber formwork and temporary structures that were used before. Before Binishells were introduced 50 years ago, any structure like a thin shell had to be built with formwork that cost 10 or 20 times more than the structure itself, which was an absurdity. That is why I threw myself into this field, and it remains to this day one of the most important construction technologies in the world. Think about it. I have built 1,600 domes across 23 countries, and at 94 years old, I can say that.
Di 94 anni posso fare un'affermazione del genere.
Mr. Bini, you have demonstrated the possibility of creating spectacular forms with air. But what is your sense of it? Why have architects been so resistant to adopting this method?
Perché non hanno capacità inventiva.
I think there is still a great deal of untapped potential when it comes to working with new materials. Take reinforced concrete with steel. It is, in many ways, a contradiction. It is possible to reinforce concrete with non-corrodable materials, such as carbon fiber or fiberglass. And yet these innovations have been slow to take hold, which to me is surprising. The same is true for thin shell structures. Young architects, teachers, schools of engineering and architecture have somewhat lost sight of them, perhaps because they have not fully realized how different today's materials are from those of 50 or 100 years ago.
I materiali sono diversi da quello che erano 50, 100 anni fa.
The first time I had the idea of building a reinforced concrete dome, 12 meters in diameter, 6 meters high, it was to challenge a certain way of thinking. My professors insisted I was talking nonsense, that as an architect I should stay away from construction science, that my only concern should be the aesthetics of spaces. And yet, aesthetics is part of construction science.
E dovevo solamente curare l'estetica degli ambienti, e quando invece l'estetica fa parte della scienza delle costruzioni.
Mr. Bini, going back to your story, why did you choose to study architecture? And how did you end up building domes in the mushroom field?
Io ho avuto la fortuna.
I was lucky enough to be born into a family in the wine business. Distillery Villa Bini was one of the largest wine producers in Italy at the time. We had tanker ships carrying wine from Sicily and North Africa to every corner of the world. So I was already intellectually immersed in operations that were anything but ordinary.
In operazioni fuori dall'ordinario.
They asked me to study industrial chemistry. I enrolled at the University of Bologna, and I fled quickly. I didn't enjoy it, and I understood nothing.
Non mi piaceva e non ne capivo niente.
So I went to the Faculty of Architecture in Florence, where I found people I could have real conversations with. And there, I realized that in construction too, there was the same resistance to accepting that we were living in a new century. Most professionals were still building according to schemes born 2,000 years ago with the Romans, among the greatest builders the world has ever known. Just look at a single sequence of arches in a Roman aqueduct. Look at how they understood construction science, producing a constant flow of water carried into our cities. It is astonishing.
Ma solo vedere come interpretavano a quel punto la scienza delle costruzioni per poter produrre un livello costante di acqua da portare nelle nostre città è una cosa veramente che sorprende.
So, why did I throw myself into the mushroom field? Because I knew something new had to be done. After the tennis ball intuition, I went to speak with professors at the University of Bologna. I asked them why no one was attempting to use the simplest and most economical thing in the world, air, to lift tons and tons of concrete and steel. They laughed at me. They said, "Bini, you are not an engineer. You are not even an architect. Try to accept what the experts of the past are teaching you."
Quindi lei cerchi di accettare quello che gli esperti del passato le stanno insegnando.
But I was lucky. My family owned a field between Castelfranco Emilia and San Cesario. They gave me permission to develop my ideas there. So I got to work, and I had a great deal of fun building dome after dome.
Allora, io mi sono divertito e ho fatto un sacco di cupoli.
Mr. Bini, seeing these domes rising up among the fields and farmhouses is truly striking. How did the experiments unfold, and what were the main difficulties?
The Binishells system was developed there, not simply in the attempt to lift concrete, but reinforced concrete, and to ensure that, through pneumatic force, it would rise and land exactly where the calculations said it should. Many times I struggled to control the lifting process. Concrete is fluid, and it naturally tends to roll down along the walls.
Molte volte io ho avuto difficoltà durante il sollevamento a controllarlo, tale sollevamento, perché il calcestruzzo fluido ovviamente tende a rotolare lungo le pareti.
My first idea was to think like a tailor. Before pouring the concrete, I would create segments of fencing iron, like the panels of a garment. Then I added concentric rings that would rise and descend with the air. Originally, these were connected with chains.
I cerchi concentrici che salivano e scendevano con l'aria. Originariamente erano collegati addirittura con delle catene.
The concentric reinforcements I laid on the ground, on top of the pneumatic form, were held together by chains, flat before the lift. And after, they settled into exactly the position I wanted. And then there was the challenge of controlling the fluid concrete. That is where the idea of the springs came from. Arranged in a specific way, they could contain not only the steel needed to reinforce the domes, but even the electrical cables. Everything.
I disegni riuscivano non solo a contenere l'acciaio che serviva per rinforzare le cupole, ma addirittura anche i cavi elettrici, tutto.
Mr. Bini, the largest dome in the mushroom field looks like a pantheon. There is an oculus at the top. Was the pantheon a reference point for your architecture?
All my domes have a central opening, and perhaps that does come from the Pantheon. I went there once, when I was still a boy. It was raining outside, and yet the water did not come through the oculus at the top, because the warm air inside prevented the drops from entering. That detail struck me deeply. I was just a boy, but I never forgot it.
You often say that technology matters, but nature comes first. Is nature the true source of inspiration?
Absolutely. When you make a fritter, it puffs up. That is natural force producing a curved form. And curved forms are the most resistant in the end. You will never see columns with crossbeams in nature. That is the idiocy of the human brain, creating a column with a beam on top. It is structurally unstable compared to any thin shell structure. It makes no sense whatsoever. In front of me, I have a photograph of tropical plants. Their leaves are curved. They take on wonderful forms, precisely to hold rainwater and then to move with the wind, allowing water to nourish their trunks. If you do not study nature, you cannot understand that it is the greatest teacher in any field at all.
Insomma, se uno non studia la natura non si rende conto che è l'insegnamento maggiore che uno può avere in qualsiasi settore.
And that is where the idea of thin shell structures comes from. I did not invent them. Elliot Noyes and Mario Salvadori did in the 40s. Felix Candela then used them in Mexico. But I took them somewhere new.
After those years, you moved to the United States and reinvented yourself as an entrepreneur. What drove that shift? The culture of America or the fact that Italy simply wasn't listening?
Esatto.
Exactly, both if I'm honest. Then, when I started to be invited to Australia, I had to manage the companies on the ground. I was the site director more than an entrepreneur. What truly keeps me alive is passion for construction science, a field that never stops evolving.
Let's talk about life on the building site. Why is it so important for you to be there in person during construction?
Assolutamente, io non posso esimermi.
I simply cannot stay away. I have to go to the site and see how what I have designed is actually being built. If a professional stays glued to the drawing board or the computer, they cannot understand what it means to participate in construction.
Non si rende conto di che cosa significa partecipare all'edilizia, alla costruzione vera e propria. So,
Getting your hands dirty, feeling the concrete, the materials you are working with, that is essential. The building site is where innovations are born. In fact, the very first dome came about precisely because I wanted to understand what it meant to work on a site.
Tanto è vero che io la prima cupola che ho fatto a Crespellano l'ho fatto proprio perché volevo capire cosa significare lavorare in cantiere.
Your work has sometimes been called utopian, and yet, talking to you, that label doesn't quite seem to fit. Why do you think it's stuck?
Well, psychologically speaking, there is something utopian about the idea of shaping matter, of lifting with air 390, 400 tons of concrete flat on the ground. There is a touch of utopia in that, but it is a utopia that can be realized.
Però è un'utopia, è realizzabile.
And I understand why people have called me a builder of utopias, because in the end, what guides a designer is not scientific reasoning, not technical reasoning, not even architectural reasoning. It is intuition.
Sono intuizioni che guidano un progettista.
When you began these experiments, were you thinking about the people who would actually live inside these domes? Or was the desire to achieve the impossible simply stronger?
Dunque, prima di tutto,
Initially, I didn't think about how a person would feel living inside a dome. My focus was entirely on achieving the form itself. But then I had long conversations with several clients, and one in particular, Michelangelo Antonioni, truly made me understand the meaning of the space around a human being.
il significato che ha lo spazio attorno all'uomo.
One of the first things Michelangelo said to me before giving me the commission was, "First of all, I am not going to pay you. I will only cover your expenses. But if I am happy with your work, I will call all my friends and you will be their architect, a paid one." After I built the dome on the Sardinian coast, Costa Paradiso, Antonioni told me that when he walked in, he wanted to see the sea. I understood immediately that to enter a dome and see the sea, you have to enter from above. And so, as you walk in, there is a curved window, the glass disappearing into the concrete, and the sea is right there. Then he told me he wanted to smell the sea, to hear the gulls, to smell the juniper trees nearby, and then he stopped me. He said, "I want to smell the fragrance of space and time when I enter your dome."
Il profumo dello spazio e del tempo entrando nella tua cupola.
I didn't get it at all. I said, "Maestro Antonioni, forgive my ignorance, but what do you mean exactly, the fragrance of space and time?"
Non ci arrivo. Ah no, non capisci. Sì, allora venga con me.
So he took me to a quarry of pink Sardinian granite, the kind that looks like flesh. He asked a worker to split open a boulder. The crystals inside were already visible. And the moment that boulder opened, Antonioni took me by the back of the neck and pushed my face into it. I tell you the truth, the fragrance that came from that granite was something beyond words.
Contenuti nello spazio e nel tempo da secoli è una cosa indescrivibile. Tanto è vero che voi potete farlo voi stessi. Andate in qualsiasi posto, trovate un pezzo di granito, spezzatelo, anche se è piccolo, e annusate. E quel profumo è il profumo che Antonioni descrisse, il profumo dello spazio e del tempo.
And so I decided to use raw granite for the stairs, so that, as you descend from the point where you first see the sea moving toward the exit, that fragrance would follow you.
Che ho fatto in granito grezzo non levigato, che in effetti emanava questo profumo che si sentiva appena entravo in casa.
What did working with Antonioni teach you about the people your spaces are truly built for?
Michelangelo era un personaggio un po' particolare e di una sensibilità inaudita.
Michelangelo was a rather particular person, a sensitivity beyond words, and a sense of aesthetics, of the relationship between volumes and interior structures that was truly unique. He taught me what it means to live in a space when the perspective shifts with every step you take. He said, "You see, when I walk through a forest, I am captivated by the changing perspectives along the path. Walking inside your dome, I want space that wraps around me, alive and in motion."
Lo spazio mi avvolge, mobile e attivo, non passivo. E lui mi disse, mi ricordo ancora.
When you walk through a traditional room, you feel trapped in a closed and static cage. I want you to build me a dynamic life. Those words stayed with me throughout all my projects.
Mentre voglio una vita dinamica entro la mia componente. Infatti è stato il punto che poi io ho sentito molte volte ripetere durante l'esecuzione di molte strutture.
But also for schools, for instance, and libraries. In Australia, I built libraries where you are wrapped in culture, where culture enters your very self. You feel it around you, alive, active, and working inside your mind and your heart. I even tried to build on the moon. I was given a commission, and I said, "Forgive me. I am possibly the most ignorant person in the world when it comes to astrophysics. And you come to me?" "Yes," they said. "We come precisely to you." But that is another story entirely, one for another time.
Mr. Bini, what makes you a happy man today?
Vuole la verità o una battuta?
Do you want the truth, a joke, or both? Well, the truth is, I had the chance to marry an exceptional woman, and that's the only thing in my life that truly matters. The second truth is that I've met extraordinary people along the way. Painters like Sergio Vacchi, who helped me understand space as something alive and dynamic. You can feel it in my domes.
Elemento dinamico che ti avvolge. E questo in tutte le mie cupole lo avverti.
But you'll feel it too if you go to the Pantheon in Rome. Walk through it, and you'll feel the space wrapping around you, almost breathing, making you feel good. I invite you to go back to the Pantheon with that idea in mind. You will find that you are happy to have space that adapts to you and not the other way around.
Sentirete che siete felici di avere attorno lo spazio che vi avvolge e che si adatta a voi più che all'opposto.
Thank you for joining us today, Mr. Bini. We hope to have you back soon to talk about new projects, new intuitions, and perhaps that story about the moon you promised us. Until next time. I'm Ginta Biku, and this is Giorgetti Voices, a podcast by Giorgetti. Music by Max Zoara for Kuji Studios. Editing and sound design by Vincenzo Verna. Producer Margherita Zamvit. A production by Sounds Great.